And welcome to this final Cyburgh breakout session, what to expect when conducting risk assessments of your cloud provider with Mark Haupt, Chief Information Security Officer at DataBank. If you have questions at any time, go ahead and leave them in the chat and we will get to them at the end during Q&A. Also, don't forget to join us after this for attendee networking. The link will be in the chat momentarily, or you can grab it from Sched. That's all for me. So Mark, thank you for being with us today. The stage is all yours.
All right, well, thank you, Allison, for that introduction. And I didn't realize that I was the last one on the docket. So hopefully we've saved the last for at least some sort of best here as we move forward. All right, I want to thank you all for joining me today. My name is Mark Haupt. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at DataBank. DataBank is a co-location and managed services provider and located there in the Pittsburgh area, as well as 64 other data centers across the United States. So this is a great opportunity for me to share with you what we expect when we're working together to conduct a risk assessment type of situation inside of our data centers. It's very important that we all work together in that process because we know that risk assessments are important. I'm going to begin sharing my screen with you so that we can work through the slide presentation I've got, and we can talk further later on with any questions that you might have about how we can address your specific needs and your specific problems in this space. So you should be able to see my title screen there of what to expect when conducting risk assessments from your cloud provider. And what we're going to do is we are actually going to walk through a problem set, if you will, a problem that we can all agree with, that conducting risk assessments and the ability to verify security posture in any type of environment, especially whenever you're moving this type of data and these types of environments out of your business, is absolutely essential. So when you as a business place your data into the cloud or physical assets, you have to have a trust relationship between your data center provider or your cloud provider and yourself and your auditors, as a matter of fact, as well. So we're going to take a look about how we can address this problem whenever you have two competing organizations, if you will, that have different interests involved in the process, and how we could all come together to have a well-rounded risk assessment and audit program and remove all of the difficulties that surround that type of situation. So the first thing I want to do is just make sure that we all understand what we are talking about here, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about what a data center provider is and what this whole thing we call cloud is. So you obviously have an enterprise setup in whether that's on-prem with yourself or already with another provider. Whenever you're using a data center provider, you're going to hear two key terms out there. One is cloud and the other one is co-location. There may be a third term that's synonymous with services that are rendered to both of those areas, and that's called managed services. And DataBank provides all three of those. But what we provide for you, what any data center operator provides for you under a co-location environment, is essentially real estate on the floor that allows you to put your physical assets, your servers, and your data and other systems and applications inside of a cage or a cabinet type of situation that you almost fully manage inside of your environment, inside of that environment. The data center provider will manage the physical security and will manage the environmental security, meaning the fire suppression systems, the power, and things like that. Inside the cloud, we move deeper into this type of relationship where perhaps almost all the time, you are no longer managing the hardware. You're no longer managing perhaps the virtual machines that these systems, the applications will reside on. Depending on whether you select an infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service type of environment inside of one of these cloud environments, determines exactly how deep a provider it would go in regards to risk assessment and in an audit type of situation. So if you're looking at my screen right now, we have these different boundary layers, which is absolutely important for you to understand as a customer when you're moving into these types of environments, what you're responsible for in a typical type of situation, and what we would be responsible for as a provider in these types of situations. So on the co-location side, essentially a data center provider is responsible for the physical and environmental security controls. But then as you move deeper into the infrastructure as a service type of environment, we would provide the security layers at the virtualization, the servers themselves, the physical aspects, the networking possibly involved in that, the storage involvement, and again, physical security. As you move into the platform as a service environment, the provider increases their responsibilities and takes some of those responsibilities from you. And in a risk assessment and an audit type of situation, as the provider takes on more and more responsibilities, there should be more and more back that's given to you in that risk assessment and that audit type of situation. So in a platform as a service, we're looking at taking over responsibilities for the networking, the operating system on the servers, as well as all the items that are identified under the infrastructure as a service, to the point that a PaaS provider is typically only looking at not providing security services at the application and the data level. So those are some key boundary layers that you need to understand when you're walking into these types of environments and it will frame how you do a risk assessment and how you conduct the audits that will occur within these types of environments. So let's take a look and dive down a little bit about what you should do beyond understanding the boundary to be prepared as you move to these cloud and move to these potentially co-location type of situations. One of the key things that we find is lacking when a customer comes to us is knowing what frameworks that the customer needs to comply with. So for example, do you need to comply with HIPAA? Do you need to comply with PCI-DSS for credit card acceptance and processing? These are things that we find that customers are lacking that we can help you with, but knowing those frameworks up front is absolutely important so that we can give you the right documentation, we can architect a solution for you, and we can come up with the right responses for the risk assessments and the audits that occur. So other frameworks that you might need to be considering beyond those typical HIPAA and PCI, do you need to have CJIS compliance, for example, if you're using criminal justice information systems? Are you a provider of federal systems? And in that case, are you looking at FISMA or FedRAMP? All of those things and disclosing them up front to your provider will help in smoothing out the process and allowing both sides to be prepared. Another key area is knowing your legal requirements. So there are some states that have additional legal requirements, or your particular business may have additional legal requirements that need to be involved in the auditing and the risk assessment factors that go into play. For example, you may be a law firm yourself and operating information systems for a law firm that requires taking into consideration various court orders and requirements for e-discovery, which is typical, but even beyond that, some sort of confidentiality requirements in regards to a particular case. So those types of legal requirements are absolutely important. Knowing what government requirements you have. So inside of the United States, we have a certain set of federal related requirements that are out there, depending on which type of framework you're going to look at. For example, if you're doing FISMA, there's a certain set of requirements, and there's a different set of requirements for FedRAMP. But then on the other hand, there may be a different set for privacy efforts. So knowing what those requirements are is important. Knowing where your data is sourced from is also important in regards to those government requirements. For example, if you have people inside of the state of California and they live there and you have their data, you may have to comply with the CCPA, or you may have to consider complying with European Union type of regulations like GDPR. Again, just because you are in Pennsylvania or you are in the United States does not mean that you cannot or should not, in your risk assessment process, consider the laws and regulations that are outside of that space and provide that information, have the dialogue with your provider to prepare for that type of situation that might come up. Another key factor that unfortunately a lot of people forget when they come to us is remembering their own corporate security requirements. Lots of times people think that they could turn things over to the cloud security provider as a turnkey solution, and that their own corporate security requirements are out the door and they become the corporate security requirements of the cloud provider. That is not the case. The cloud provider should be taking into consideration your corporate security requirements as well. So those are things that we need to discuss, and you should be prepared to discuss up front or as things change throughout the life cycle of the contract. And certainly make sure that your executives have their expectations set correctly. You do not want one of your C-level executives thinking that a risk assessment or an audit can be conducted so deeply like it occurs within their own spaces, within their own offices, and then turn around and find out that it cannot, or it cannot occur in as depth as they desire. So set those expectations appropriately. So some of the things that you should be expecting now, as after you've been prepared and you understand where your boundary is, you understand what your legal requirements, what your framework requirements are, what can you automatically and should expect from your service provider without really having to ask the questions, but you really need to ask the questions to make sure. And that is this: first of all, you should expect that there is a baseline audit report that can be provided to you. It's typically going to be an SSA 18 SOC 2 is what you would ask for. Some companies ask for a SOC 1, which is more regarding the financials of the company, but the SOC 2 is going to be addressing the security functions of the company and how those have operated throughout the year or a specified time frame. So be aware that SSA 18 is transitioning to the SSA E20 format here in 2021. These new standards are coming out, so you can upgrade that statement, if you will, over the next couple of years. 18s are still valid, 20s are coming. Also, within that SSA 18, understand which trust principles. There are 5 trust principles, but understand which one or which ones the company that you're looking at as being your provider are actually handling. So if there's 5 trust principles, there's some of them that are not going to be handled by your provider. For example, privacy and confidentiality type of situation should be handled by any type of report that is generated on your side, because the data, and we'll talk about this in a moment, the data is always going to remain your responsibility inside of these provider type of situations. The next thing you should be looking for is part of your risk assessment, not necessarily an audit, but your annual risk assessment process. You should be looking for a questionnaire to be completed by this provider, at least on an annual basis, so that you understand what is responsible from your side, from our side, and what the status of these things are beyond the audit reports. So the Cloud Security Alliance provides a standardized questionnaire called the CAIQ that your provider should be able to give you. This allows you to map the questions between various frameworks, such as NIST 853 and the ISO 27001 type of scenario, and allows you to map those and make sure that you can comply, kind of like an API, a cross-language type of situation. So make sure that your provider can provide a questionnaire. Make sure they can provide business documentation to you as well, such as certificates of insurance and business establishment documents. You don't want to get involved with an organization that all of a sudden you find out is not actually signed up, if you will, from a legal perspective to operate in your area. Another key factor, especially if you're a PCI customer, but really if you're any type of customer, you should be able to receive a RACI document or a responsibilities matrix that shows you exactly upfront what you're responsible for, what the provider's responsible for, and what's shared in between. That document should be easily read and should be one that you can easily understand who's responsible for what. So you can have an Excel spreadsheet, for example, which is what PCI typically does, that has markings that will color code and determine who's responsible for what just by glancing at it instead of actually having to read the words, and also fill in some notes, if you will, next to that. The responsibility matrices, or matrices, I should say, are all very, very important of what you should expect. So going back to a comment I made earlier, one of the things that you should expect is that data is always the responsibility of yourself as the customer. Even though you place your data inside of a cloud provider, it is still the responsibility of you to maintain, manage, and ensure that that data is protected. One of the things that customers frequently believe is, again, that turnkey solution. They can drop it inside of a provider and that provider is covered. We've seen many breaches that have occurred over the years in all sorts of cloud providers where that belief was held and the customer didn't take the necessary precautions, such as encryption on the data to ensure that it is not lost, if you will. You should also expect to provide to follow the rules of the provider. There are rules that are set up on, both parties obviously set up rules, and one of them is maintaining a no tailgating policy or something like that, and bringing visitors into a system, into a data center is another important rule that we provide, that we ask that you follow, and you should expect to follow that. And that's important from an auditing and a risk assessment process, because knowing what those rules are will allow you to address any type of discrepancies or concerns that you might have. Another way is another area of concern, if you will, that you should deal with and you should expect is to use the ticketing system or use a communication system from your provider. Keep in mind that these providers have literally thousands of customers, and being able to talk to their customers in one single format is absolutely important. A couple other things to look at is make sure that your MSAs govern everything that you need to have governed, and that your SLAs apply as well. Your service level agreements absolutely apply to risk assessment and auditing. A lot of times your IT teams will put together an SLA and not consider risk assessment and auditing in that process. Couple quick things and then we'll go to questions about what you should not expect or what should not happen inside of these types of situations. You should not expect that that your provider will complete all of the documentation that you put in front of them. You should expect that they provide a standardized questionnaire, but to complete your documentation, again, it's a matter of scale. Completing 3,000 different organizations' documentation can get very difficult for any provider to do. So you asking us to provide anything other than a standardized questionnaire and perhaps elaborate on some of those responses can get difficult. So be careful in that scenario. You should not expect that the provider will sign whatever you put in front of them. So if you put a DPA in front of them, you should not expect that they sign that without probably some give and take and some redlining going back and forth. That type of give and take is absolutely important. One other key thing, and then we'll move to questions that a lot of people forget, is that our SSA-18, our audit reports are not your audit reports. All they are audit reports over the functions that we as the provider give to you. But any piece of function outside of what we provide to you, and those things that are under your responsibility are not inside of our audit reports. We have many times where our customers will believe that our audit reports should cover them, so they don't do a PCI assessment or they don't do an SSA-18 on their own side. That is a misnomer. That is a situation where you need to correct that. If that's your current belief, you need to have your own audits and your own types of assessments that are done. That applies for risk assessments as well. You should be conducting your own risk assessments. All right, so I want to give you, I just want to thank you for spending some time with me here today and going through this briefly. I am here to help you. If you have any further questions, we can answer them here. And if we have further questions outside of this, we can certainly connect on LinkedIn and otherwise. But here's the thing that I want you to walk away from with this whole thought process is that though we have a problem of two different companies wanting to do risk assessment and audits, we can create a partnership between our businesses to ensure that both sides are satisfied and both sides are working towards an end goal that is happy medium for everyone. So partnership is the key, and hopefully we'll all remember that as we move forward. Allison, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Mark. I don't see any in the chat just yet. We'll give everyone a few seconds maybe to put them in there. I'll take this opportunity to remind you to join us for networking after this. The link is in the chat. It's also in SCED. And also don't forget about our closing keynote at 11 a.m. I try to speak nice and slowly there, but I'm sure I didn't give anyone any time to type anything. But we do have about 7 minutes left in this session, so I'm not seeing anything. Maybe people can have a little downtime before the networking begins, but yeah, I'm not seeing anything for you in here, Mark.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you for joining us. If there's any questions, you can see my my contact information is here on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me. Happy to work with you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you everyone for being here today. We will see you at the networking and then again in our keynote at 11.